Welcome to the final video related to the American political system, the American government, and the U.S. Constitution. In this third and last video, we're going to take a look at the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And what's interesting about the Bill of Rights is that many of the states would not ratify the U.S. Constitution as it was written. They needed these specific rights to be in there for them to ratify it. So by 1790, when all the present states had ratified the Constitution, the Bill of Rights was already a part of the Constitution. And they're probably the most important amendments in the whole Constitution in terms of these are the amendments most, if not all, Americans know. They often quote, they often use. And these are the 10 amendments. These amendments remind us of where we came from. So they're very, very important in in American history and the American political system. So we'll take a look at the Bill of Rights. First of all, the amendment process for the U.S. Constitution. There's two ways that the U.S. Constitution can be amended. One is that Congress, the body that makes the laws of our country, can propose an amendment to the Constitution. Just like any other bill, it's written up, it's discussed in committee, it's voted on by both houses. If both houses agree with it, then it is sent to all the states, and three-fourths of all the states must approve that amendment for it to then become an official amendment to the U.S. Constitution. Any state that comes into the Union after an amendment has passed and has been added must adhere to that amendment just like they must to the Constitution. What's interesting with this process is that only the northern states during the Civil War approved the amendment abolishing slavery. But after the Civil War in 1865, as the southern states which had succeeded decided to come back into the Union, they had to pledge that they would follow that amendment. And that was difficult for some of the states. And actually, it was 15 years before the country was unified once again with all the original states before the Civil War began. Some of the southern states had a real problem accepting the fact that the black man was free and that there was no slavery. So that was, and of course they were upset because they were not part of the voting process, but the North's argument was that they had chosen to secede from the Union, and the North was America, and the South was the Confederate States. So therefore, the North had the right to put this amendment forth, and if a state wanted to come back, they had to agree to everything in the U.S. Constitution again, and to all the amendments, including the amendment that abolished slavery. The second way that an amendment can make it into the Constitution is for a constitutional convention to be called. If a constitutional convention is called, then each state must send delegates to a location, and they then discuss and change and modify the Constitution. Never in our history have we used a constitutional convention, because ultimately that would mean changing the actual Constitution directly as well. And most people feel that this document is very, very good. We've lived with it for over 200 years, and it should not be changed at any point. That's not to say that a constitutional convention may never happen, but chances are slim that it will happen. Interestingly enough, this is totally a legislative process, and the president has no role in the amendment process. He can suggest amendments, he can comment on amendments, but he cannot in any way write, debate, vote on an amendment whatsoever. So this is truly one piece where the Congress has complete and utter control. Of course, the Supreme Court could determine that an amendment is unconstitutional. And then, if that's the case, then that amendment is struck down, temporarily blocked, and Congress must rediscuss, revote, whatever the case may be, on changes to that amendment based on the court documents put out by the Supreme Court. So that's the amendment process in the United States. Currently, there are 27 amendments to the U.S. Constitution. 6 amendments have been suggested but have not been approved. That is, they have not received a 3/4 state majority, so therefore they're not amendments. Most people don't even talk about them anymore. It's not often that we have a complete amendment to the Constitution. I'm trying to think, even in my period, what amendments we've had that have made it to the Constitution. And not many, if any, if I can remember. Many of them came in very early in our country's history, as the country was still developing. Who are we? What do we stand for? Things like that. Then, of course, with the Civil War came a couple and things like that. The voting age amendments, changing the voting age to 18 in our country, and of course the other amendments were the amendments that gave the right to vote to women and to minorities as well. So those are some of the last amendments that actually have been attached to the U.S. Constitution. So let's talk more about the first 10 amendments, which are collectively called the Bill of Rights. What you should remember here is that the Bill of Rights were a direct result of British occupation during the American Revolution. The British, in trying to control the colonists and have the upper hand during the Revolution, had instituted a number of laws where they were governing and where they were ruling. And many of these amendments came from the fact that the British really, many colonists, many Americans felt had terrorized the country. And they wanted to make sure that no government, even our own government, could do that again. So that's where these amendments came from. The First Amendment is simply referred to as freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. Basically, you can say anything you want so long as it's not defamatory or slander. You can follow any religion you'd like. There is no official religion in the United States, so it's open. You can be Catholic, you can be Protestant, you can be Baptist, you can be Muslim. It doesn't matter. You have a right to follow the religion, which is probably also one of the reasons we unfortunately have too many cults or strange religions in our country. They can be recognized as religions in our country, so therefore people can join them, can follow them, and nobody can stop that. Freedom of press. This was very big because, of course, the colonial printing press were pretty much silenced during the American Revolution by the British. And the British would come in and simply destroy printing presses if a printing company was printing what they thought was defamatory information about the British. So therefore, freedom of press is very, very important in our country. Again, so long as the information can be backed up, can be proven to be true. You are not allowed in freedom of speech or freedom of press to defame or slander anybody. If you do, you can be charged with a crime. The freedom to assemble, which means to simply form groups and to talk. Um, Colonists, specifically in Boston, were not even allowed to stop on the street and have a conversation of any conversation during the American Revolution, during the British occupation, because the British thought that they were plotting against them. And then the right to petition your government, which is the last part of this First Amendment. You have the right to petition your government to ask for information, to petition them to try to do something, to change something. There are laws governing how to go about the petition, how many signatures you need, and things like that. But you have the right to do it, and the government has to honestly look at it and give you an answer. They cannot just throw it in the garbage and ignore it. So the First Amendment is the freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. And mostly speech, religion, and press are the three that get the most play with this First Amendment. The second is the one that's probably the most controversial in our country at this point, and that is the right to bear arms. When the British were occupying parts of the colonies, one of the first things they did was go from door to door and take whatever guns and rifles and weapons farmers and regular townspeople had. The British were thinking that they were protecting themselves. And of course, every farmer, almost every townsperson had a gun at this time. They were used for hunting purposes to protect yourself from, let's say, Indian raids in various parts of the country. So it was really, many people felt violated when the when the British government came in and took their guns. So the Second Amendment is the right to bear arms, that is to have a gun. This has been so interpreted so many different ways by states. Some states allow you to buy guns freely without any process. Other states, like New York, have a very involved process of buying a gun, making sure guns don't fall into the hands of known criminals or people with a mental disorder and things like that. Whenever the federal government tries anything related to gun control, for example, automatic or semi-automatic weapons, which the federal government believes that there's little reason for a citizen to have a semi-automatic weapon in their possession. The people who staunchly believe in this amendment, this is when they are really, really up in arms and are saying that they're breaking our Second Amendment right to bear arms. So it's a huge controversy in our country. Um, what do we do with gun control? How do we control it? How do we make sure that guns don't fall into the hands of criminals? And to be perfectly honest, everything that they put out there, almost nothing has been successful. So we still have a number of shootings, random shootings, drive-by shootings, things like that in our country because people have obtained guns. So, Amendment number 2, the right to bear arms. And almost nobody says bear arms anymore, but bear arms simply means to own a gun. This is another one you don't hear much about. Amendment 3 deals with the fact that the government cannot quarter soldiers in a person's house. Again, during the American Revolution, the British would come into a town or a village or a city, and if they took control, the first thing that they would do is they would need to find housing for their soldiers. What they would do is they would go to people's houses and say, we're controlling this town now, so therefore you're going to take 5 soldiers into your house. You are responsible for feeding them, for doing their wash, and all of this. And this is referred to as the quartering of soldiers. In towns like Boston, this was a big, big issue because, of course, Boston was the seat of the Revolution, and having those soldiers in your house was very, very daunting and could be very, very troublesome. Um, so, since the American Revolution, there has been no time, even during the Civil War, when the quartering of soldiers was done, and it was illegal to even do it during the Civil War. Um, Unfortunately, when we're not on our own soil and involved in war, maybe we're putting soldiers, for example, during World War II, putting them into French houses and Belgian houses in those cases. But in those cases, we were the friendly soldiers and not the enemy. So many people did it with open arms. But it's still a big issue that we don't put soldiers into our own homes on American soil. The other thing that the British often did during the American Revolution was arrest people without probable cause. They suspected that this was a rebel leader or that this person was a troublemaker, so they'd simply arrest them and throw them in jail. We feel today, and they felt then, that this was unjust, that the police or the military should not just be able to come and take you away without a probable cause. And probable cause says that they have good reason to suspect that you are involved in a crime. And when they arrest you, they must come with a warrant. This is a piece of paper signed by a judge indicating that the police have enough information to arrest you on a specific charge. So therefore, they have to bring a warrant. They have to bring a warrant if they're going to search your house, they're going to search your land, they're going to search your car. It doesn't matter, search your person. They have to have a warrant to do that. And with that warrant comes the concept of probable cause. This is very, very important in our system of justice. You cannot arrest somebody just because you think they're a troublemaker. You have to have probable cause. This comes up often when some minorities feel that they're being racially profiled. Racial profiling refers to the fact that police look for certain types of people, certain skin colors and things like that in the wrong neighborhood, and then they purposely stop those people to find out what's going on because they shouldn't be there, or they're out of place. Um, Racial profiling based on this amendment is against the law. Um, if a cop stops anybody, whether that person's white or black or Hispanic or whatever the case may be, they have to have a reason. Your tail light is out on your car, or you were driving erratically, or you were speeding. They can't give you a good reason for that, then they can't hold you and they can't arrest you. And many of the cases where racial profiling has happened, it has shown that the police were in the wrong during that time. So, number four is the fact that you cannot be arrested or searched without probable cause and a warrant. Five continues this concept of crime, and if you are arrested, you have the right to due process. Due process means that um, in a reasonable amount of time, you are processed through the justice system. They just can't hold you indefinitely. They just can't keep you in an interrogation room. Eventually, at some point, they need to charge you or they need to let you go. This is very, very important. Some cases are won and lost because the cops kept the person too long, or didn't give them a lawyer, things like that. That's all part of due process. In addition, you can be indicted. And indicted means that a grand jury, a special jury convened, hears the charges, and this pool of people think that there's enough evidence to take it to court. So you can be you're the right to be have indictments put against you. If there's no indictment, then you can't be held. You also cannot incriminate yourself. You are not required to say anything, to confess to anything. You hear them in these, they read you the Miranda rights on these cop shows. You have the right to a lawyer. If one can't be afforded to you, the one will be provided to you. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You don't have to incriminate yourself. You don't have to admit to anything. You don't have to take the stand in your own defense, whatever the case may be. And in addition to this, if you're married, your partner cannot be compelled to testify against you. So if a husband commits a crime, and there's not enough proof, but the wife knows that the husband committed the crime, she's not compelled to testify against you. She can claim spousal privilege, and spousal privilege means that she doesn't have to say a word. Oftentimes, criminals will get on the stand and they're being questioned, and they'll say, "I plead the fifth." To plead the fifth means that you're invoking the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination. So if you hear that on television, that's exactly what it means. Or in a movie, I plead the fifth. That means that they're not going to answer because it might incriminate them. Maybe you have another criminal testifying against the criminal who's being charged, and somehow he was involved in a crime, and that comes up. He has the right to say, "I plead the fifth," and he doesn't have to say anything. If any of your property is seized, you are entitled to compensation, not full value of your property, but some sort of compensation for your property. Oftentimes, like especially in drug busts, property is seized, boats, cars, houses, things like that. Um, the person does receive minimal compensation, and then the stuff is auctioned off at a very reduced price, and that money goes into the law enforcement budget, not into the criminal's pocket. So you have the right to due process, to face indictment, to not incriminate yourself, and to be compensated if they seize property. In addition, you have the right to a speedy trial. So due process means that you're charged with a crime and they don't hold you for very long. I think in Britain, they can hold you for up to 48 hours without charging you. In America, that never happens. 12, 24 at the most. And then in addition, you have the right to a speedy trial, which means you don't have to wait years and years and years for your trial to happen. Your trial needs to happen again in a reasonable amount of time. And in all criminal cases, you have the right for your case to be heard by a jury of your peers. That's referred to as an impartial jury. Finding jury members is big business nowadays. Finding the right jurors to sit on a specific jury is big business because they may sympathize with the criminal, or they may not like that type of criminal, that type of person. So lawyers want to make sure that they get the right jurors into that impartial jury. In addition, you as the accused have the right to confront your witnesses, or you have the right to have your lawyer confront your witnesses. This is that cross-examine you often see in programs on television. So the defense or the prosecution brings up a witness who says one thing, and then your lawyer has the right to cross-examine this person. But it happens for both sides. If the defense brings in witnesses, the prosecution has the right to cross-examine them as well. And of course, you're guaranteed a lawyer. We have what's referred to as public defenders. These are actual lawyers who work for the public defender's office, and their job is basically to represent people who cannot afford a lawyer. In addition, most cities and states have what's referred to as a pro bono policy. Lawyers, once they become a lawyer, are required by some states to put in so many free hours of work. That's referred to as pro bono work. So every lawyer is supposed to do some amount of pro bono, or their law firm is supposed to do some amount of pro bono. Um, There is a difference between a criminal case, which is what's talked about in the previous amendment, and a civil case, which is what's talked about in amendment number 7. A civil case it's not criminal. It means wasn't murder, wasn't fraud, wasn't a burglary, armed robbery, anything like that. This is where maybe one person thinks that they were injured. For example, a woman sued McDonald's because her coffee was too hot at one point. That's a civil case. There was no criminal charges filed against McDonald's, but she was injured, and as a result, she wanted compensation for her injuries. Those are civil cases. Well, at the federal level, when the federal government heard civil cases, you were guaranteed a jury in this case as well. So you could be You could have your case heard by a judge who would make a decision on his own, or you could have a case that was heard by a jury. Nowadays, federal courts are not involved in civil cases. They're only involved in criminal cases. Uh, this too is an interesting one. This is the one in which the death penalty is often the big thing here. The Constitution guarantees fair and not cruel punishment. So if you are convicted of a crime, the punishment you should face should not be cruel, but it should be fair. And there are sentencing guidelines for all types of crimes in all types of courts. If you commit murder, uh, premeditated murder, which is you planned it and things like that, you could get life in prison. Or in some states, you can get the death penalty. But if you only sold a small amount of marijuana, maybe you get 18 months or something like that. So the you can't be thrown in jail for an exorbitant amount of time for something that's a small crime. In addition, death penalty people who are against the death penalty will cite this amendment because they say no matter how we kill a person, whether it's by firing squad or hanging or electrocution or in today's society, lethal injection, it doesn't matter, it's still cruel. We're doing something not normal, not natural. This is the argument that some people make against the death penalty. This is not held up actually in court. Especially with lethal injection, because you can put the person to sleep before you're actually administered the drugs that will kill that person. The court has not found that to be cruel, and the court has never ruled that the death penalty is not fair. So there are still states in which the death penalty is a punishment that you could receive for certain crimes. Uh, it's not used a lot in many states. Texas, Oklahoma seem to use it a bit more. It is on the books in New York, where I'm from, but it's very, very seldomly used in New York. In addition, if you're being fined instead of going to jail or both, um, again, there are guidelines for how much you can fine a person. You can't fine a person an exceedingly large amount of money because he sold an ounce of marijuana. But there could be a fine of $200 or $1,000 or something like that. That's more reasonable. So again, there's a whole bunch of sentencing guidelines available to judges that tell them what is the appropriate amount of punishment based on the crime. Number 9 says that anything that's not listed in the Constitution is still protected by the Constitution. For example, gay marriage. Nowhere is it listed in the Constitution, but the federal government recognizes that that's a right of people to marry people of the same sex. So therefore, even though it's not listed directly in the Constitution, it's protected under the Constitution, which is why the federal government allows and recognizes gay marriage no matter where the person was married. Um, if a new ethnic group comes to our country, we don't have to put in a specific amendment giving them rights. They are entitled to the same rights as everybody else that's in our country. So rights not listed are protected. Um, but the question comes down to what is a right sometimes. And that's what the Supreme Court sometimes has to decide. Is this a right? For example, segregation, especially in education. The Supreme Court said that it is the right of everybody, no matter what color is their skin or what is their background, to the same education. It's not listed in the Constitution, but they said that this is a right guaranteed to people, so therefore it is protected, which caused some of the race riots that occurred in the 60s and early 70s as schools were desegregated, meaning schools were no longer all white or all black. They had to contain a mixture of students representative of the community itself. And that's important. And the last one says that powers not listed in the Constitution belong to the states and or the people. This would include things like education. Education is not listed in the Constitution, but education is something given to the states. They control education. Business tariffs within a state, that's controlled by states. So these last two amendments, 9 and 10, really focus on the fact that, okay, now that we know that everything's not in this Constitution, never will contain everything, so therefore rights, whatever those are guaranteed, and powers. So the Constitution specifically says, hey, the federal government can raise an army, therefore states cannot. The federal government can tax so that they can get money, but the states can tax so that they can get money, because it doesn't say anything about that. Education is the biggest. Education is controlled at the state level and not at the federal level in our country. That's one of the biggest things in there. So the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, very, very important to our country. So when we come to class, we're going to take a look at how the Bill of Rights are applied, specifically in court cases. So this is the last of the 3 videos, so make sure you watch them in preparation for the course on the American government system. Okay, thanks.